Well, hello, I'm Steve Rankin, the chaplain at SMU, and if you've been following these little posts on Facebook, you know that we've been discussing justice with various people on campus, and we've had a number of faculty and staff give us their views about justice and how they try to enact it in their own professional lives. Today's talk is going to be a little bit different. We have with us today Trigg Edwards. Trigg is a grad student here at SMU, and some months ago he shared a very personal and painful but yet victorious story with me about an experience that he had some years back now. But it seemed like it would be relevant for our discussion about justice, and this one is pretty much about raw experience and how Trigg has come to think about justice and forgiveness and what those terms really mean personally for him. So I'll give you a little bit of the very broad background of this story, and then we'll ask Trigg to share some thoughts with us. So a number of years ago, not long after he had graduated from another university, he went back to that university for the graduation of some friends, and on arrival in the town where he was, he wound up being severely assaulted by someone, and literally all the bones in his face were broken. And so imagine the excruciating pain of that experience, not to mention the physical pain, not to mention the other kinds of psychological and spiritual agony that went along with it. And then in the process of the treatment for it, to overcome this terrible situation, interactions with a physician that it turned out that the pain Trigg was feeling was just so severe that none of the treatments were actually helping the way they should, and then the doctor perhaps did some covering up and explaining away, sort of making it Trigg's problem. So the point here that I'm trying to make is, in addition to the physical battering and all the troubles that one has in healing from that, on top of that is the complication of professional people who didn't provide the kind of care that they should have provided, and then made things worse by suggesting in some ways it was really Trigg's problem and not theirs. So here's a question about justice, sort of on the ground you might say, living with it, and then how does one get the justice, so to speak, that one feels one needs, but doesn't become bound up by the possibility of bitterness when the overwhelming unfairness of it begins to come out.
Well, it doesn't come from necessarily what people do for you, it's how you treat yourself. And one of the things you have that's always within your grasp is how you maintain your character in a storm. And the best thing that you can do is make sure that your character, as well as the dignity of your soul, is intact. If you're overwhelmed by a storm like I was, like the best thing I did for myself was to let go of kind of the poisons within that would do you in, and that was the best decision I made. And one of the things that helped me do that was letting go of that grudges and resentment, and definitely the desire to kind of want to murder the guy who tried to murder me. And then, this happened about last year, when I was trying to remake my life because I was going through a bunch of career troubles and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was working a crappy job, and I was really bitter. I felt like my circumstances were my identity. I felt like what happened to me was my identity, and that's a miserable, terrible feeling. What I did was I went to the doctor, who ignored any question of responsibility and said I was the unclean one with the drugs. I went to that very doctor when I was having a bunch of medical problems, a bunch of acid reflux, vomiting, all that. And my life wasn't going anywhere. I was bitter, resentful, and I couldn't really see a future for me. I went to her, I treated her like a normal person, and what I did was I didn't bring up it, I wasn't resentful. I accidentally brought up the drugs, and I saw her just revolt with guilt, and she felt responsible for what happened. And that was just a weight off my shoulders. And that's kind of the best thing you can do. Because that allowed me to then see a future and kind of visualize, well, what do I want with myself? How can I go pursue what I'm meant to do? Because those two things were the hardest thing to kind of come up with and figure out. Because I was so stuck in the moment, you know, I was stuck in the past too. And that got me unstuck.
At some point, you made this decision. You sort of hit bottom. It sounds like you came to a point where you realized you had to do something. How did you decide to go back to that doctor? Was there something stirring in your mind or your soul, shall we say?
Yeah, no, it was my soul, really. It was like, you know, I didn't get what I wanted from the legal system, like that, and even if I did, it would still feel like a defeat. Like, I got victories, but they felt like defeats. And then I realized, like, eventually, like, if I wanted completion, if I wanted to feel whole and complete, I would seek it within myself, and I would seek it within God. And, you know, I kind of understood, it took many years to get to that, and then I started to let go of, like, fixed outcomes. It was easier to forgive the guy who almost, you know, who destroyed my face than the doctor. It was just much more personal. I knew her, you know, I interacted with her, she wasn't a stranger. And letting go of that then allowed me to figure out, well, what do I want with myself? What type of career, what type of life do I want? Before that, I couldn't do that. But after I forgave her and kind of let that go, it was much easier. And, you know, I felt less and less defined by my past. I didn't feel like that was my identity, and, you know, no one should want that.
So we really have two topics, you might say, and perhaps principles on the table in this conversation. One is justice, which we've been talking about for several weeks, and it sounds to me like, in some sense, to some limited degree, you were able to get justice through the legal system, but you still felt bound up in some way.
When you're in the legal system, you're fighting a war. And if your, you know, soul is kind of attached to fixed outcomes, even when what you want happens, it won't feel like a victory. You won't feel completed. So you can't seek it within the judgment of other people. But I had to realize, well, you know, God is the cosmic judge, and He'll put everything right. You know, He'll make what it seemed like everyone treated as if it was my end to be a beginning.
I think that's part of the second point then that I was thinking about, that you used the word forgive several times now. So justice and forgiveness perhaps are linked at the personal level in a way that we don't often recognize. As you told your story, it sounds to me like once you begin to realize, I'm becoming bitter, I'm actually still bound up, you know, I need to forgive, and that in forgiving these people who wronged you, that's when you really began to feel some freedom. Is that?
Yeah, that's really true. Before the criminal trial, I really wanted him dead. You know, I really did. And, you know, I remember randomly, right as I was going to bed, all of a sudden getting the urge to pray for my enemies. That was God. Because I think He was preparing me for what would happen next. In the preliminary hearing, which was in July, the guy who did it, he looked very stoic. You know, he looked like he was going to win. He was going to go in the military before. He looked very soldier-like, you know, very composed and everything. And the second time, he looked like a broken man, and I could tell it on his face. I could see it on his face, and he had guilt on his eyes, and I could see it, and it terrified me, because you don't want to see that in your enemy.
Right.
That meant he was self-conscious of the evil he did against me, which is, again, not fun, to know that your enemy can do that. And, you know, at first I revolted. I didn't like it. And I remember kind of feeling that, you know, he wasn't the source of all evil in the world. You know, he became evil. He let that consume him. But, you know, evil was more of an unseen force kind of a thing.
Trigg, thanks a lot for sharing with us today. And,
yeah, happy to do it.
And this brings to a wrap-up of our conversations about justice, and we hope that in some way they've been edifying and helpful to you. Thanks a lot for joining us.